Happy Wednesday, Dog Nation, and happy National Signing Day to the extent that even still exists as an idea here in 2021. But we'll talk a lot today about four-star defensive back Terrion Arnold, what he's expected to do at 4 p.m. this afternoon. We'll also take a look at Bear Alexander, the big-time impressive defensive tackle for the class of 2022, who's also making his announcement today. Connor Riley going to join us. We'll touch on all of that. Also special guest Tom Hart, the guy who called a very impressive win for Georgia basketball last night at Auburn. Tom Hart from the SEC Network will be with us on today's show, too. So very busy, a lot of fun. Let's get it started. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It is decision day for four-star defensive back Terrion Arnold here on the traditional. It used to be the only National Signing Day. Part of me still wishes it was. Actually, a lot more than part of me. I do wish this was the only signing day in college football. But nonetheless, it is the remnants of what used to be the February National Signing Day. Georgia really, at least when it comes to the 2021 class, only in the mix for one name here. Four-star defensive back Terrion Arnold. DawgNation will have coverage of Arnold all day long, including being on video a little bit later this afternoon for his ultimate decision. And kind of here in this morning, looking ahead to what's going to happen today, there are some things that we know and there are some things that we don't know about what's going to go down with Arnold. So I thought as a way of kind of previewing how the day is going to go, why don't we kind of unpack as much of this as we possibly can. Let's go back to Friday, first of all here. Jeff Sintel, the DawgNation recruiting insider, when he joined us on the show, said when it comes down to Arnold, his sources were telling him that this was essentially a Georgia-Alabama battle, and that top three that Arnold had once shared of Georgia, Alabama, and Florida really no longer included the Gators, and we can now make that official. Zach Abolverdi reporting for the Gainesville Sun. I'll show you a couple of sentences here from that paper on our site here. Zach writing for the Gainesville Sun that with 22 early signees and a handful of recent transfers, Florida is approaching the 85-man scholarship limit, Abolverdi writes for the Gainesville Sun, limit on its roster, and therefore did not send out any letters of intent this week. So Florida, as per usual, keeping it classy here by leaking that it didn't even send a letter of intent to Terrion Arnold. That way, when Arnold ultimately makes his decision, Florida can say, no, we didn't lose. We didn't even send him a letter of intent. So good for Florida, I guess, for putting its business out there on Front Street on that, but we kind of already knew that was true. Jeff had said that on Friday, that Florida was focusing on transfers, and to its credit, it got Rick Gilbert in the fold, so therefore did not send a letter of intent to Terrion Arnold, as reported by the Gainesville Sun there. So we are now down face-to-face, head-to-head battle between Georgia and Alabama when it comes to Terrion Arnold. What we know about Georgia is it does have the friend card on its side. It does have the close bond that Arnold has with other 2021 signee for the Georgia Bulldogs, Xavier Sorey, the linebacker. That's been something that's been a factor in this recruitment for a while, and here late in the process, you get the sense that's still kind of an issue. Sorey, the Georgia signee, has been very active on Twitter the last 24 hours or so, kind of pushing for Arnold to come to a Georgia. I'll show you one example of that just in the last few hours, tweeting out, so you still ain't going to tell me, man? That's what Xavier Sorey says to Terrion Arnold about ultimately where he's going to go there. So we know on social media, Xavier Sorey is kind of continuing to make that push towards Terrion Arnold. They've been good friends. They're both elite prospects. At one point in time, we, had certainly spent plenty of time talking about the idea they might want to play with each other, but let's face it, these kind of friendship bonds, they do sometimes fizzle here late in the process, and maybe there's a chance that's what goes down with Xavier Sorey and Terrion Arnold before it's all said and done. But the presence of Sorey on Georgia's roster as a part of the 2021 signing class has to at least help Georgia a little bit. The other stuff we know about all of this is that this kind of brings to an end a recruiting process that's unlike anything we've ever seen before. And programs are kind of forced to manage that the best that they possibly can. And you just sort of have to kind of lean on what you already do well. I think for an Alabama's case, who's obviously competing for Terrion Arnold, they've leaned on the notion of the prestige of the program. We've talked about examples of that from Saban's own mouth of, hey, we've won the national championships, we've put the guys in the first round, that's what we're selling. I think Georgia pretty clearly has kind of sold the, hey, stay in your home state and play for your home state school. You look at the 24/7 Sports composite rankings of players inside the state of Georgia, there's no doubt that Georgia has cleaned up on that for the most part in the class of 2021, maybe a little bit of an outlier compared to recent signing classes, and you might presume the pandemic and the absence of visits during that pandemic has a big part to play in all of that. But if you kind of want to go back to when we first went into lockdown, when the recruiting dead period, we found out it was going to be extended, then extended again. I mean, Kirby Smart, kind of talked then about the mechanism that Georgia was going to use to recruit, and having to be on Zoom and having to be video teleconference, not being face-to-face, and having for a lot of cases when you had these football conversations, not have football be of top of mind for the family and the player on the other side of that. As the 2021 cycle officially comes to an end today, I think it's important to go back and hear Kirby Smart, when all of this was just starting, the strategy that Georgia was putting in place. This is Kirby from back in the spring.
It's really been FaceTime, communication, talking to family members. We're checking on the well-being of everybody we recruit. We're not making it about selling Georgia as much as it is, hey, what's going on in your community now? How is your high school dealing with this? How are your grandparents? How are your parents doing? And making it personal and trying to talk to them. I know these kids are getting bombarded because, recruiting is a competitive market. And as you can imagine, they're getting a lot of calls because a lot of college coaches don't have anything going on right now, and they're calling on these kids a lot.
So Kirby, from the very beginning of the process, and he was very consistent about all of this throughout the conversation, said, hey, we want to be careful not to bombard these kids. And we want to be careful not to kind of, we used to talk about commission bread, that salesman who's just dying to, get this guy to commit and got nothing better to do than to kind of full court press these recruits all the time. We want to make sure we go about our business a little different than that here at Georgia. Smart had been very clear about that through the entire time, and it seems like it has worked more often than not. Maybe not the big national name coming in here, the way we kind of come to expect from Georgia signing classes, but as I said before, the big hit on Xavier Sorey, cleaning house inside the state of Georgia, and kind of everything that goes along with that, what Kirby Smart put into place for its recruiting efforts for Georgia in the class of 2021 would certainly have seemed to work. And it all culminates today with, can you add one more big name there when it comes to Terrion Arnold? And, we know that Georgia has got the friendship bond of Xavier Sorey to sell here. Arnold has told our Jeff Sintel before that you've also got the bond of the connection that Arnold seemingly has built with Kirby Smart. Arnold has told DawgNation many times about the conversations that Arnold and Smart have had together and the connection they felt there together. Georgia would seem to have that going for them as well. And the other thing that Georgia seems to have here, and the other thing that seems to be a little bit of a factor in all of this, is the fact that Georgia can also sell early playing time. And listen, you think about all the factors that matter in recruitment. I'm not quite so sure that anything matters more in the typical recruit's mind than the chance to come in and play right away. With Tyson Campbell leaving and Richard LeCount leaving and Eric Stokes leaving and DJ Daniel leaving, there's just so much room in the Georgia defensive back room for someone like Arnold to have a chance to impress early and get a chance to be on the field as a freshman for the 2021 season. We know that about Georgia. But here's what we also know about Alabama, because this got leaked the other day. Do you remember the show the other day when I kind of played some of the audio from the leaked Nick Saban Zoom chat that he was doing with the recruit, not Terrion Arnold? Let's be clear about this. But some of the stuff that Saban said in that chat would certainly seem to be relevant for someone like Arnold, because if you want to picture how it's going behind closed doors, we can only assume this, but the one thing that you would think that Georgia's selling to Arnold is that chance to come here and play right away, that chance to come here and follow in the footsteps of Stokes and Campbell and all these guys who are leaving. If you're Alabama, you don't have as much early playing time to offer for this upcoming season, but we did get a little bit of a hint the other day of exactly what Nick Saban does to kind of counterbalance against some of that. I thought this was pretty interesting. It's not Arnold that Saban's speaking to here, but the words that he uses, I would think you would say, are obviously relevant. Here is Nick Saban.
Everybody's going to tell you in recruiting, oh, don't go to Alabama. You can play at our school before you can play there. They got all these good players there. You won't be able to play. You can play at our place earlier. I think that's the worst stuff that people can tell you. First of all, when they tell you that, They're first of all insulting me, all right? Because I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if you couldn't play here.
Right.
Number two, when they say you can play at our place before you can play at Alabama, they're just telling you Alabama's better than them.
Yeah.
That's number two. All right. Then number three, all right, is if you ask our players on our team, they'll tell you just the opposite. They'll tell you the competition may be better.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting look there at Nick Saban, who counterbalances the obvious push for early playing time other places of, wait a second, do you think you're the kind of player that's not good enough to play early here? Do you think you want to go to the kind of program that thinks so little of itself that it says it's going to be too hard for you to play at Alabama? I mean, frankly, I think that's a pretty savvy move by Saban all the way around, and you can imagine that might have a little bit of sway with someone like Arnold, especially given the prestige the Alabama program has. So that's kind of what we know. We know that Georgia's selling early playing time. We know that Georgia can say, come here and play with your good friend Xavier Sori. Come here and be a part of a program with a head coach you already have a connection with in Kirby Smart. On the Alabama side, what we know is that Nick Saban has definitely pushed the notion of all the championships they've won, all the first-round draft picks they've produced, the fact that only a loser would essentially sell early playing time as a reason not to go to Alabama. We kind of get the idea of what the Bama pitch is. What we don't know is how all of this lands with Arnold here on the day that he makes his decision. Does he make the what would some people describe as the easy choice, just to go to Alabama, or the long-range recruiting efforts that Kirby Smart and Georgia have put into this? Does it ultimately pay off here? I certainly get the impression that Georgia is still very much involved in all of this here late in the stages of this, but obviously Alabama has to be viewed as a formidable foe. I don't think I could say that Georgia's certainly the favorite to land this commitment. You'd probably have to give that nod to the Crimson Tide. But a chance to pull a little bit of an upset and maybe bring Arnold into the fold, I wouldn't give up on that just quite yet. Let me also squeeze this in here really quickly as we also think about the things that are going to go on today. And I think we now have a time for this. It's 1 p.m. Eastern time. Is that correct? 1 p.m. Eastern time, Bear Alexander, one of the top 10 defensive tackles in the country for the class of 2022, one of the top 25 players in the state of Texas overall. So we're talking about a very big-time prospect in his own right. He is slated to make his announcement. Got the cool bear logo that he shared on Twitter yesterday, and this is a guy who really occupies a bunch of space there in the interior for defenses. This is a good-looking player, and I would say in relationship to Alexander and the choice that he's going to make later on, this is no consolation prize. You know, given someone who can maybe follow in the footsteps and walk in the shadow of what Jordan Davis has been at Georgia, that big gigantic interior defensive tackle. Georgia, if it gets Alexander today when he makes his commitment announcement, holds on to that throughout the rest of this 2022 recruiting cycle, this could end up being a player that Georgia is very glad that it has. These kinds of gigantic athletic defensive tackles, they just don't come around very frequently. When you have a chance to get yourself a really good one, Alexander is, you want to jump on that and take that. So that's a really big deal for Georgia later on today. Not just Terrion Arnold's day here, but also Bear Alexander as well for the class of 2022. The bottom line is busy day for UGA recruiting, and I'm just like you. I can't wait to settle in and watch how all of this plays out. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, now also on Twitch as well. The Twitch broadcast went off without a hitch yesterday, so we're on Twitch today. Looking forward to being there on that, and maybe we'll start taking some Twitch comments at some point in time soon. I've got a lot of acquainting myself I need to do with Twitch, but nonetheless, we're looking forward to being a part of it. I think I'm probably the oldest guy on Twitch, if I had to guess, but nonetheless, I am happy to be on Twitch with all of you here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Radio, podcast, of course, all of that, including our friends on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Busy show for us. It's Connor Riley coming up in a moment. We'll talk to him about Arnold and everything else. Later on today, we'll talk to Tom Hart. SEC Network broadcaster who called the game last night. Very impressive win on the road for Georgia against Auburn. We'll do that with Tom Hart on the SEC Network before we're done on today's program. And a huge thanks to our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort for making this all possible. This is the time of year where I think a lot of you are starting to think, I need a getaway. From Atlanta. Well, there's no easier, better getaway than my friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, because it's only a 2-hour drive from Atlanta. Whether you're talking about the original Harris Cherokee Casino Resort property or the Harris Cherokee Valley River, easy drive, 2 hours, fun gaming area, delicious gourmet dining options. I'm talking about world-class shopping, a very luxurious spa to kind of give you that ultimate relaxation experience. This is just a terrific getaway. And when it comes to the gaming stuff, the social distancing stuff has been well taken care of there. So your health and safety of a paramount concern from our friends there at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Find out more about this and become a Caesars Rewards member. Let me give you the website to go to. It's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That'll get you in touch with my friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. And we're happy to have them presenting DawgNation Daily to all of you here today. All right, I'm going to do Connor Riley in a moment. We'll talk some UGA recruiting. Before that, let's go around the doghouse. And yesterday, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle on social media because the website you may be familiar with, the Twitter account you may be familiar with, Freezing Cold Takes, drug up something that I had said a couple of years ago on the Paul Feinbaum show and kind of mocked me for it. Listen, I need to be mocked every now and then so my ego doesn't get too big. I need to occasionally be taken down a peg. But if you missed this, here is what Freezing Cold Takes put out on Twitter. It said, Throwback Tuesday, going back to something that I had said on the Feinbaum show a couple of years ago about Nick Saban and what might be kind of the end for Saban. You can read this for yourself, but I actually have the audio because I keep receipts on myself the same way I keep them on anybody else. This is me saying something that, at least at face value right now, would certainly appear to not quite be correct. Here is me from a couple years ago.
Well, I can tell you that, it'd be obviously very wise for Kirby Smart to sort of paint the contrast between he and Saban. Smart is new in his career. He's a young, energetic figure. And I no doubt imagine that he tries to use that as his sales pitch on the recruiting trail. And there is a pretty sharp contrast between that and Saban right now, which no matter how you slice it is in the winter of his career. And I do believe that some of the moves that you've seen, I heard the interview yesterday with the reporter who mentioned the feeling that they had gone too far in the direction of recruiting. I think the quick response to that, the changes that have been made, certainly make it seem like that Saban's operating right now on a short-term plan. It's not a 5-year plan of, what's the situation going to be like years down the road. This would seem to be an execution of maximizing the opportunity and winning as much as you can right now with the very talented roster that's amassed in Tuscaloosa. To me, from the outside looking in, that's what this appears to be. That's not reporting. That's just my opinion. But it certainly seems like Saban is trying to maximize this short-term opportunity he has in front of him and would lead me to believe that he sees the end of his coaching career at Alabama coming sooner rather than later.
So that's my freezing cold take there, because obviously Nick Saban's the reigning national champion. I'll just say two things about this really, really quick. The one thing that you obviously would have to say that I'm taking an L on here is the notion that somehow Alabama recruiting would slow down because of my description of Saban being in the quote-unquote winter of his career. That's obviously untrue, and I will absolutely take the L on that, every day of the week, because the Terrion Arnold recruitment's the perfect example of this. Here we are at the very end of the stage, Georgia fighting for its life, and frankly, probably fighting a little bit of an uphill battle to even earn the commitment from Terrion Arnold. Alabama has just cleaned up and gotten everybody that's wanted. So clearly taking an L on that. And it would also appear that I'm taking the L on the other part of this too. Alabama on the field, they are the reigning national champion. But here's the one thing that I at least think is worth watching. And some of you, especially those of you who are not Georgia fans, may think this is me doubling down on an obvious loser. But nonetheless, here's what I think is worth watching. We just saw a phenomenal season for Alabama, and yet a lot of the success that Alabama enjoyed this previous season, I'm not quite so sure I would give the coaching credit to that to Nick Saban. Now, listen, coaching matters. Bama proved that this year. Nick Saban's obviously still an excellent head coach, even at this stage of his, 69 years old. Even at this stage of his life, he's still an outstanding coach. But can you honestly say that Saban was the most important coach that Alabama had this past season? We saw Saban miss a game because of the coronavirus. We saw him almost miss the Georgia game because of the coronavirus. And yet we had Barrett Jones, former Bama player, folks like that come on the show and say, listen, when it comes to the offensive side of the ball, Saban's not even that involved in that anyway. That all belongs to Steve Sarkisian. And Sarkisian put up the best numbers than really any offensive coordinator may have ever put up when it comes to that. Steve Sarkisian, in my mind, was a more important coach for Alabama last season than Nick Saban was. Now, Sarkisian's head coach at Texas. It certainly appears that Alabama has made a sterling hire as his replacement. Bill O'Brien was a coach in the NFL this year, and yet he's about to be Alabama offensive coordinator. It seems like Alabama's made a big-time hire here. But there are a lot of things that seem one way that turn out to be another. So in terms of what Alabama is on the field in the post-Steve Sarkisian world and how that impacts the rest of Saban's career as a head coach, it's at least worth watching to see. I've told you before, I'm taking a bit of a wait-and-see approach on Georgia until I know just how good Alabama is. But that doesn't mean I can't also take a bit of a wait-and-see approach on the Crimson Tide as well. Nick Saban really benefited from Steve Sarkisian as his offensive coordinator this past season. Is Bill O'Brien as good as Sarkisian was? If he's not, then it may cause us to think a little bit different about Nick Saban. That's Around the Doghouse. Before we're done here today, as promised, Tom Hart from the SEC Network will talk to him about a big Georgia basketball win last night. But speaking of big, nothing bigger than National Signing Day here on this first Wednesday in February. So for more on that and everything else going on around UGA, let's do a Kroger Fresh Take with our buddy Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, so Connor Riley here. A lot of talk about everything going on with Georgia recruiting. And I guess, Connor, let me just kind of begin it this way. How in it for Arnold do you think Georgia is at 4 p.m. today? How big of a favorite? I think you would have to say Alabama is the favorite here. How big of a favorite do you think Alabama is for Terrion when he chooses?
I mean, they're the favorite. I believe the stat I saw was since 2009, Alabama has more defensive backs drafted in the NFL 20 than losses 15. They have a sterling record of developing talent. They're going to have the first defensive back taken in this year's NFL draft with Patrick Surtain. Yeah. But Georgia's still in it. Look, signing day gets weird. There's been some weird stuff before. It was around this time, 2 years ago? You were asking, is this real?
Right.
Do I need to dig that clip up for some people out there that are thinking that this is over?
Sure.
To quote John Rambo, nothing is over.
There you go.
So it could get weird, and I'm not saying it's weird. I think Georgia's got a very good shot. Reading sort of the tea leaves right now, nobody seems to have a really good idea of where Arnold is going. I feel like if it were more certain, I think we'd see more certainty from the Alabama side than we are currently seeing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I played the audio of Saban a moment ago, and it's important to point out that in that clip, the leaked Zoom, he's not talking to Terrion Arnold, but he might as well be, right?
Yeah.
Because Georgia's selling early playing time, come here and replace Campbell or Stokes or, maybe even Richard LeCount, in the right circumstances. Saban says, listen, that's a loser's mentality to think that you can't come to Alabama and play right away. I think Saban's pitch on that certainly comes from a position of strength, and I think it probably works in a lot of cases. But privately behind closed doors, my hope is, as a Georgia fan, that Georgia is rolling up its sleeves and getting aggressive and saying that Saban is lying to you if you think that you get a chance to play as quickly at Alabama as you do at Georgia, just on the basis of the rosters right now. There's just more of an opportunity for that at UGA. Now, I wouldn't want Georgia to lie to him either and say, you're definitely coming in here and playing right away, but I would believe it's just objectively true to say you have a much better chance of doing that right now than you do at Alabama, just given the way the rosters are made up.
Yeah, it sounds like Alabama is pitching him on playing corner at Alabama, whereas Georgia pretty clearly sees him as a safety. Could potentially play him at star next year as well, just given sort of the turnover that Georgia has had there. It is interesting to note that Georgia does have to replace both its starting cornerbacks, but you have two starting safeties returning in Chris Smith and Lewis Seen there as well. So playing time, again, Terrion Arnold I think is good enough to play wherever he goes. Yeah. He is now the number 50 recruit in the country. So I think wherever he goes, he is going to be good enough to eventually make an impact at that school.
Well, let's talk about that part of this for a moment, because there's a cynical side of me that kind of views the uncommitted prospects always seem to kind of climb the ratings here late in the process. I think that Arnold became a 5-star on the 24/7 Sports rating the other day, their individual ratings, not the composite. How much of Arnold's the conversation around him is just based on he's the only guy we have to talk about, and how much of this in your mind is based on the fact that no, he really is a pretty special player, no matter at which point in the process he actually announced his decision?
I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously, we've seen this time and time again where the uncommitted recruits towards the end sort of do get more attention, but Jeff's been talking about this guy as an impact safety since November, when there were plenty of big-name targets still on the board, and Jeff had him up there as the number one top target on his own board on Before the Hedges, which you can catch tonight at 8 p.m., which will have a very special guest making an appearance on there. So I think Arnold is good enough to play wherever he wants to. And while, yes, he has risen a little bit, he was about, I think, before the most recent rankings updates, he was a fringe top 100 recruit, and now he's the number 50 recruit in the country. Again, when you've got schools like Alabama, Florida, and Georgia after you, schools that have produced a lot of defensive back talent in recent years, I think that says a lot about the type of player you are.
And the other thing on this, and we'll kind of close the book and talk about something else, whether Arnold chooses Georgia today or not, my guess is that Georgia's still probably trying to land a defensive back in the portal somehow. There was the guy from Oklahoma that just kind of showed up here in the last 24 hours. Every kind of potential big name or even semi-big name that kind of shows them the portal as a defensive back, I think we'll try to link them to Georgia in our minds at least a little bit. So I'm hopeful for good news on Arnold, and I have not closed the book on the fact that it might be good news for Georgia when it comes to Terrion Arnold. But whether Arnold comes or not, I think that Georgia is still probably trying to land a defensive back before the summer comes.
I'd be even more specific about that. I would say they're trying to land a cornerback more so than necessarily a true defensive back, someone that could play safety. And Bradley Ridley-Hines, the Oklahoma defensive back, he does not project as an outside cornerback. He is sort of more maybe a nickelback star in Georgia's defense, potentially a safety as well. And I think Georgia likes the depth that it has there at that safety position. But at corner, you have zero starting experience returning for this team. Before we sort of transition into the next segment, I'd like to play an old classic.
Okay. George Pickens, this is official? This is real. George Pickens has flipped to Georgia. As we're doing this live right now, George Pickens, the 5-star wide receiver, we're just finding out about this. George Pickens has flipped to the University of Georgia. I like to hear that.
There's a lot of negativity out there. People are down about Arnold and where he might potentially sign. I feel like it is my duty, my responsibility to say, hey, a national signing day, as we have seen before, literally on this program, anything can happen. So until that paper is turned in and until the official Alabama account tweets it out, Georgia still, I think, has a good chance at landing Terrion Arnold.
I think you're right about that, and I'm glad to kind of go back and revisit the George Pickens thing because that was obviously so much fun for me when that came down. I remember all of that, how it played out, you coming into the studio room to give me that sheet of paper. That was a lot of fun. I'm glad that you were able to dig that up. Here's the one thing, and I'll just be very, very honest here for a moment. I'm always trying to make sense of the kind of late momentum on signing day eve because, listen, I have great respect for the people who cover recruiting for a living. That is not an easy job. Our own Jeff Sintel and other people that work for other outlets. I have great respect for them. But the one thing that you have to be honest about is that there's a lot of incentive to kind of sell the so-and-so is making it close late because that benefits the coaching staff for the team that finishes second. It benefits the player because he can kind of sell drama ahead of his decision, and frankly, it's just good content all the way around. So the so-and-so is closing strong and really making this tough late. I just never know how real any of that is because that narrative is so well incentivized.
Yeah, it benefits everybody.
Right.
So you do, I think,
me included. By the way.
Yeah. I think it's fair to have some skepticism when it comes to that. But I will say with this Arnold news, following it closely, he hasn't really made it be known where he is going, at least to coaching staffs. And me personally, having followed this, not just this recruitment, but a lot of recruitments pretty closely. You look at a Jermaine Burton a year ago, the writing was pretty much on the wall that he was going to flip on signing day. For me right now, I don't see the writing on the wall with Arnold. Obviously, there's been some talk of Alabama in the past couple of hours, but I don't think anybody's whipped the paint out and written on the wall in crimson red ink quite yet that Arnold to Alabama is officially a done deal.
Let's talk Nick Saban here for a moment because, as I said before you joined us, I got cold-taked yesterday on what I'd said about Saban in the past. And when it comes to recruiting stuff, I mean, I got nothing to do but just admit that I'm taking a huge L on that because Bama recruited this year as well as they ever have. I do think the pandemic helped them in a way because they were able to sell prestige in the absence of personal connection, the way that programs like Georgia typically like to use visits, a way of doing that. But whatever the reasoning behind it was, Bama has recruited this past cycle as well as anyone's ever recruited ever before. And the question you have as a Georgia fan, whether it be, recruiting battles like this one with Arnold, maybe more importantly on-field battles that you hope you get a chance for a rematch in maybe come December of this year, how do you upend that momentum, Connor? That's a huge question, facing Georgia right now.
They just got to beat them on the field.
They do.
It's that simple. You talked, I think, yesterday or Monday about the now or never, the piece from David Hale on ESPN. Georgia's recruited every bit as well as Alabama has in recent seasons. Obviously, this season, there's maybe a little bit more of a gap, but 2018, Georgia recruited a better class than Alabama did. So, talent-wise, again, Georgia is tit for tat with them. And, I think we're going to see these two teams match up on, I guess, December 2nd, 3rd, whenever the SEC championship game is. And at the end of the day, I don't buy I think I'm with you on the whole, the championship window. It's not closing or anything like that. But at a certain point, you just have to beat Alabama, and there are no excuses. And I think if there's a year to do it, where you probably have an edge at quarterback. We'll see what Bryce Young looks like in game 12, 13, as opposed to game 1.
Right.
I think if there's a year where it could happen, I feel like this would be the year.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that there's enough talent on the Georgia roster right now that just with what you have, Arnold comes or not, with just what you have, you could conceivably coach that up enough to actually get that win against Alabama.
Yep.
It's kind of like the whole thing about get rich quick. That's a scheme in people's mind. Same thing with building a college football power. You can't shortcut your way to being as good as Alabama. You have to earn that on the field and the kind of slow process of player development that actually leads to that. This is a very you and I are on the same page. It's not the sort of put up or shut up year for Georgia, do it now or don't do it ever, but it is a crucial year towards just slowing down what has seemed like a runaway train of momentum.
Yeah. The 2018 SEC championship game is about the saddest I've ever seen you after a post-game or a post-game show down there on the field. You did not want to be doing a show day.
That's right.
I shudder to imagine your feelings if Georgia were to lose an SEC championship game in Alabama again.
I know.
With all this talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, this really feels like the first time Georgia, I don't want to say maybe is ahead of Alabama, just given, Alabama's recruited so well there on that side of the ball, really everywhere. But it at least feels it can go toe-to-toe. And it's worth mentioning, Georgia's the only team all season that had a second-half lead on Alabama.
That's right.
And so there have been parts that they've been able to go toe-to-toe. I think Kirby Smart has had some great game plans. They just haven't been able to finish. And I think 2021 is really the year Georgia absolutely needs to finish that game against Alabama.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here today. And don't forget, Kroger's got big deals in your team meals as you head towards the Super Bowl this weekend. Party platters and drinks and everything else that goes along with that. Make sure you take advantage of that from our friends at Kroger. Big spot to stop by and get stocked up for the big game coming up on Sunday. And we appreciate Connor Riley being a part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today. Let me squeeze in one more thing before we get ready to talk to Tom Hart here today. Your reaction to the Rick Gilbert news. I'm a huge Rick Gilbert fan. I obviously wanted to come to Georgia. I don't think it's the end of the world that he's not at UGA. I do think it's a big deal that he could be playing for Florida. But these are the kinds of things that happen. You win some, you lose some. This is one that Georgia did not win. What do you make of the entire landscape here that has led Gilbert to land in Gainesville and not in Athens, where some of us maybe thought he would have gone at one point?
It would have been irrational for him to come to Georgia if Florida were seriously an option for him, just given Georgia has quite abundance of talent at tight end and I think at wide receiver as well. So even if you wanted to play him out there, he's still competing with George Pickens, Jermaine Burton, Kyrus Jackson. I could keep naming names of guys who have the potential to do big name stuff out there. So while yes, Florida is sort of turning over its roster, especially its passing attack, there's a real opportunity for him to go in there and be their number one go-to receiver next season. Emory Jones is obviously a very different quarterback than Kyle Trask, but I think Gilbert had the potential to be a focal point. They've shown that they can develop talents. Kyle Pitts was not the superstar recruit that Gilbert was, and Pitts is going to be a top 15 pick in this upcoming NFL draft. So he made the rational decision, I think, going to Florida. Obviously, it hurts Georgia a little bit there, but I certainly understand the decision that he had made.
Really important for Georgia to beat Florida on the field this year and prevent any program momentum for Dan Mullen to be established as the place that's capable of using unique talents creatively. I don't think you want Dan Mullen to get that foothold in the SEC.
No, especially because for so long Georgia has sort of struggled offensively, at least in terms of developing and creating big-name players. if Florida's able to go out and do that and then sell that to straight-up high school recruits instead of having to get them through the transfer portal roundabout way, that's only going to make life more difficult for Georgia and Kirby Smart going forward.
Connor, great stuff. Thanks for being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
And I tell you what, I want to do this. Let's hold off on the SEC through for now. Go ahead and get Tom Hart on the phone. SEC Network broadcaster Tom Hart called what was a really impressive Georgia basketball win last night over the Auburn Tigers. Georgia's a pretty big, underdog on the road, and yet played very well and went out and got themselves a really good win. And all of a sudden you start looking ahead to a Vanderbilt team coming in Athens on Saturday and maybe a chance for Georgia after, let's face it, a couple of really ugly performances. The South Carolina game a few days ago was this team's worst of the year. They've had a couple of performances where you were kind of left, hoping that Georgia might be able to build on something. The Florida game coming off the win against Kentucky, and it just wasn't able to happen. And yet yesterday, Georgia gets the win against Auburn, and all of a sudden you start thinking about a Georgia team that might still be finding itself as you head towards the most pivotal month of the season in college basketball ahead of the March Madness stuff. What happens in February really matters, and maybe Georgia's coming together here at the right time. So we got plenty more on UGA recruiting. We'll talk about all of that and the Arnold stuff, but to take a break here from that to celebrate a big win for the Dogs, I think is a lot of fun, and of course no better way to do that than with the guy who called that from the SEC Network. And by the way, I'm also curious to find out how Tom and John Sunvold, who was working with last night, how they're navigating the challenges of being, at their home, calling these games, through video teleconference. I think that's we've all had to learn to do some things like that here in this year. But man, what a challenge that must be for the college basketball broadcasters who are used to being courtside, who are used to kind of having those conferences with the referees after controversial decisions and, some of the things related to that. It's a challenging time for those broadcasters, but they are doing a good job bringing all of that to us, including Tom Hart from the SEC Network. Georgia gets the win over Auburn last night. Tom, thank you so much for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. I certainly appreciate you spending a couple minutes with us here today.
Yeah, Brandon, happy to do it.
So I was mentioning this before you came on, the challenge that you guys are going through this year, and I would imagine, you may tell me wrong, that basketball may be more difficult to broadcast from home than football is because, you're used to being courtside. You get a chance to talk to the officials after a controversial play, or you hear some of the coaching chatter that you just wouldn't hear in a football, press box, broadcast booth. What has it been like calling these games from your basement, your living room, wherever you've been, this season? I would imagine it presents some incredible difficulties.
Yeah, every sport's different. Really, every broadcast is different. I'll give you a quick story. The week Georgia football went to Kentucky, if you remember, people remember correctly, we had a big storm come through the Atlanta area that week, and I was without power at my house starting, I think that was overnight Tuesday or maybe Wednesday. And so I called my bosses. I said, hey, I got no electricity. How am I supposed to do this game? Lo and behold, I packed up all my equipment. I threw it in a couple Publix bags because I'm not an engineer. I don't have the cases to carry this stuff. I haul it out to Marietta to my spotter's house, and we do the game from his dining room table. Now, that was a really big game at the time. Sure. Kentucky's offense didn't show up second half, but that looked like it could be, a big game in the SEC that weekend. And about midway through the second half, I get a text, and I look down at my phone, and it's a text from Vern Lundquist. And Vern says, hey, Tom, I'm really enjoying your call on this Georgia game. I said, thanks, Vern. How would you like to see my setup? And I sent him a picture of my buddy's dining room table with his son in his Halloween costume standing in the background in the living room, and Vern was just apoplectic that we would be calling a game of that magnitude from somebody's dining room table. So there are challenges. You are dead on with the conversations that I have with officials, both not just in-game but pre-game. I go out and talk to the guys, and they help me learn about their job and the intricacies of it because there's always something new that pops up. We were lost a couple times during the Georgia game last night of calls on the floor or reviews of what they were doing, and it's just part of it, unfortunately. There are a lot of benefits to it, but I'm afraid, and the part I hate is that we can't get the fans the quality that they're used to and that they deserve.
Well, we appreciate you kind of pushing through and you guys doing the best you can, because it's certainly still a very entertaining product, even if it's not quite what we've come to expect. As far as the Georgia team last night, Tom, there's no way to say this. Georgia played awful, a few days ago at South Carolina. But my gosh, it really seems like they've, found a renewed sense of energy since then. The win against Ole Miss last night, to go on the road and go wire to wire against an Auburn team. Now, it's not a packed gym, and so it's not quite the same kind of road environment you would typically expect at Auburn. But that was a pretty good performance from Georgia last night.
Oh, it was a really good performance. And I think your South Carolina point certainly stands, but if you take into account the way they shot the ball against Ole Miss and what they did last night, that's more of a trend, and it's easy to see how South Carolina could be an aberration. Now, I will throw this out there. Frank Martin played a defense in that South Carolina game that he's never played before.
Okay.
And talking with Tom Crean before the game, they were over-preparing to face South Carolina's pressure, extended man-to-man defense, and Frank Martin said, we're not going to do any of that. My guys can't play that defense. The COVID has us, just kind of going very basic and fundamental. So we're going to lay back and play in the gaps and play a very lazy, this is just a term, but
sure,
a very lazy man-to-man.
Sure.
And I think that certainly caught Georgia by surprise. No excuses. They were terrible offensively. They didn't hit shots. Last night was I think it showed the potential of what is still a very young team. Xavier is still just a sophomore,
right,
and you could argue, well, he should, he's played a lot of minutes, but there's still a lot of growth to come in his game, and I was really impressed with the way he matched up last night with Sharif Cooper, who's a surefire first-round pick, probably 10th overall, give or take, and Xavier Wheeler looked like the better player last night.
So let me ask you this way, because I want to set up for something else, but when you see Georgia in these couple games this year, I'd mentioned the Arkansas game as well, where it just seems like, Georgia really did not look great. How much of this is maybe some specific inconsistencies that maybe Georgia's dealt with, and how much of this is a part of a kind of a larger story? Tennessee did not look good last night against Ole Miss. Florida had a stretch early in the season where they didn't play very well either, where, everybody kind of, is prone to having the occasional bad night. How much of the Georgia struggles at times this year are just related to some of the other stuff you're seeing from some of the other SEC teams as well?
It's all related. It's absolutely, and it's the biggest frustration of coaches that I talk to on a daily basis that say, I can't motivate my guys like I typically do. Every coach I've talked to has said that, and basically every sport. This goes back. I was standing on the sidelines of Kentucky football practice, and Mark Supes was saying the same thing. I can't push my guys like I normally do. I don't. And basketball coaches want to spend more time with their guys, and they just can't do it, especially away from the court. Tom Crean has brought this up multiple times when we've talked to him over the last week. He said, my guys have a hard time understanding how long the game is and that the other team is going to make mistakes too. And when he talks about the length of the game, what he means is just because you're down on the scoreboard, don't let that get you down mentally, because you've got plenty of time to come back and win this thing. This is not scientific. It's not analytic. I haven't pressed anybody for the numbers on it, but I think I've seen more runs of 10, 12 points in college basketball this year than I've ever seen before, because players just kind of get down on themselves. And it's not always an indicator of who's the better team. It's just who grabs confidence at that moment to go on that kind of run. And the offensive outburst can certainly lead to stifling defensive performances on the other end, because the confidence goes 94 feet. It's not just on one side of the court.
Sure. So all of that said, let me finish with you with this then. Georgia's got Vanderbilt on Saturday. It's a very winnable game at home, and you start to think, well, based on the last two games, how much better do you think the month of February could be for this Georgia basketball team?
Well, I'm going to hesitate to say it could be great, because all of those inconsistencies that we talk about could rear their head with this Georgia team. You never know. And I caution people I just said this the other day, I caution people to judge coaches or players based on the season, because they've never been through anything like this before.
Sure.
If you just want to point to the success that Georgia had in the second half last night, I give Georgia a ton of credit for being on the glass, for hitting open shots. But at least part of that was the fact, for some whatever reason, Auburn refused to play half-court defense, and Georgia's straight-line drives getting to the rim it was inexcusable from a defensive standpoint for Auburn. That's not taking anything away from Georgia. That will be there at times in the Vandy game. That's not going to be there all the time. It's not going to be there every half. So I think Georgia still needs to counter that, like what you get in and around the rim, which is part of Georgia's offense, with knocking down perimeter shots, and then we can continue to see more growth from this young team.
Tom, really appreciate your time. Thanks for the work you guys are doing to bring this sport to us there on the SEC Network. I look forward to watching a bunch from you on TV, and certainly appreciate you spending some time with us here on our program here today.
All right, Brandon, great to catch up with you. Be safe.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
We will transition now to our SEC Through here, and obviously it's not just National Signing Day for Georgia. It's National Signing Day for the rest of the SEC as well, although certainly a much more subdued version of that than we've kind of sort of experienced in the past. As we said before, Florida was good enough to leak its intentions today that it did not even send a letter of intent, not only to Terrion Arnold, but to anyone. So you can kind of scratch Florida off the list of really doing nothing. I guess the schools to really watch here are, kind of Tennessee, Auburn, these new coaching staffs needing to kind of fill out their roster and kind of, seeing where those programs go. So keep your eye on the new SEC coaching staffs as far as some of the big news related to signing day goes here. With that in mind, Trevin Wallace is, a linebacker prospect. At one point in time, you thought, well, maybe, maybe Georgia might even get involved with late in the process. That seems like it never happened. But there had been, some chatter that certainly Auburn was of interest to him, but Wallace has announced his commitment. He is going to Kentucky. So for an Auburn coaching staff trying to, put together a 2021 signing class and really trying to reestablish, quietly, even though Gus Malzahn was winning some games in the field, quietly Auburn had not really recruited as well the last couple of years as we'd kind of used to seeing them. And once Malzahn officially went on the hot seat for good, it seems like their 2021 recruiting momentum just absolutely, the air came out of that balloon like so fast right away. You think about the way it just went completely quiet on Smile Mondin, for instance, some of those other guys. So obviously Brian Harsin, that coaching staff, got a lot of work to do, and Trevin Wallace here choosing Kentucky as an example of them not getting a win there in that category. But, listen, I think that Derek Mason's going to be a good defensive coordinator. We know that Mike Bobo is capable of, putting some stuff together, and it seems like he's already got some irons in the fire here for the class of 2022, so that's worth paying attention to. Speaking of the state of Alabama, and one of the schools I mentioned a moment ago, I guess a little controversy at Oxford High School, which is a very good program, by the way. Oxford's producing big-time players each and every year. But when Josh Heupel became Volunteers coach of the day, I guess they kind of walked away from a previous Tennessee commitment. Rock Taylor is his name. I think he's a wide receiver, a 3-star prospect, and Tennessee essentially pulled his offer. This is late in the process to be pulling somebody's offer. And, look, nobody's proud of this, and, we kind of – sort of try to sweep it under the rug from time to time. But this is a thing that happens. It does go on. But that coaching staff at Oxford was not happy about this at all. In fact, I believe the money quote here from the Oxford head coach is this, that no matter where he ever works, that the Tennessee coaching staff will not be welcome on his high school ever. So little bit of controversy related to some of that. As Josh Heupel and the Vols try to put their coaching staff together, try to put their recruiting class together, and Auburn trying to do the same thing. So a lot of this kind of stuff is going to be worth watching, and it's hard not to be at least a little bit nostalgic for what this used to be. I'm not a fan of the early signing period. I made an appearance on 960 The Ref this morning, the radio station there, and I was talking with their guys about that. Look, what the early signing period was supposed to be, I just don't think it has actually turned out to be. This was one of those things of, for the people who thought there was too much drama on the February signing day, we're going to have this December 3-day signing period to let the guys who don't want the drama to go ahead and get their recruitment over with, and we'll save the drama for the people who want to go in February. But as those of you who follow all this kind of stuff closely know, it's worked out the exact opposite of that. We've just moved the drama up to December, and frankly, probably intensified it to a certain extent. And schools like Georgia, and listen, the power programs are finding a way to navigate all of this. They're not, they're not suffering too badly because of this. But if you're a school like Georgia, who's in the conference championship game with regularity, you can say something about Alabama programs like that. If you're in the conference championship, game with regularity, if you're competing for the college football playoff with regularity, the December signing period could conceivably be a huge disadvantage for you. It's another reason why the less power programs, I think, were in favor of this. Just anything to potentially upend the momentum that the best programs have when it comes to recruiting. But all the rich do is just get richer. The strong programs just get stronger. That the entire idea of what the early signing period was supposed to be, I just don't think any of it has really worked to the degree that it was intended to. And frankly, being crazy with recruiting like 2 days before Christmas also just kind of seems kind of weird to me all the way around. But nonetheless, that's what it is. That's how it goes. It's kind of quiet on that front today. Maybe it's just nostalgia for me, but I sort of wish things were the way they used to be. We'll make that your SEC through. So a great job today by Connor Riley, both as a guest on the show and producing, especially on the fly when we have a chance to kind of pick up Tom Hart kind of on short notice like that. So thanks to Connor for helping navigate all of that. And thank you to Tom Hart from the SEC Network for being here on the show today and talking about a fun win for the Dogs against Auburn on the road in basketball last night. Now let's talk about those lousy, stinking Gators because we love talking about that. Gator hater roll call now. We'll have our golden shoe winner. I'm going to shout out Wild Boy here on Twitter, who first of all said that I wouldn't put this on the screen, and he said that I ignored him on Twitter. Wild Clout Boy, I definitely am not doing that. So what this is it's a urinal basically with the Florida Gator logo right in the middle to kind of give you something to aim for. So Wild Clout Boy having some fun with that. He is our golden shoe winner today. How about Gator Hater Countdown? 269 days from right now, Georgia takes it to those lousy, stinking Gators. We will see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. So hopefully we covered all the bases today. Terrion Arnold, we'll see what happens. Bear Alexander, that's worth paying attention to. And Georgia basketball, fun last night against the Auburn Tigers. Always good to see that bunch go on the road and getting that win there. All right, let me now dive in here and take some of your comments. I guess we'll go Facebook first. I think we did YouTube maybe first yesterday. Maybe we didn't. Let me go YouTube first, and we'll do Facebook after that. I'm trying to remember. I need to pull up both comment sections anyway. And so y'all tell me what you think about Terrion Arnold. You think where he's going and how it plays out and kind of what you think about where all of this stands for Georgia right now. We will do all of that. All right. Frank Patterson says, are you doing any live signing day shows today? Yeah, we're going to be on video this afternoon covering everything that goes on with Arnold and everything else. So we're going to be all over that today on video this afternoon. We'll be on the air probably, 3:30, 3:45, something like that, and covering all of that. Dallas Schwartz back with us in the comment section, looks like today. Good to see him back over here. Let's see what else. Good to see Breda Pest Management in here, too. Nature Gator says what Bama's doing on the football field and recruiting unfair to the rest of college football. I mean, listen, it's you got to give them, credit and respect. I mean, listen, I throw around hot takes and we do all that kind of stuff, and you win some, you lose some, and frankly, I don't mind the scoreboard kind of keeping up with it. Bama is definitely performing at a level that I probably did not foresee for them at this late stage in the juncture. I do think, whether you're Nature Gator and you're a Florida fan or you're, me and a Georgia fan, the job here is to take what you have and find a way to beat Alabama. There's no shortcut to this. There's no easy way to do that. You just got to find a way to kind of go out there and get that done. And if you can do that, maybe have a chance to change things. Nature Gator mentioning basketball as a potential sway for Arnold towards Alabama. I do know that's important to him. Y'all know I've said this before. I love to watch football recruits dunk. Arnold had a very, very impressive windmill dunk the other day. I mean, he threw that thing down. And, I guess Alabama is, obviously willing to let him play basketball, but, kind of giving Bama's a good basketball program right now. What Nate Oates is doing there in Tuscaloosa is very impressive. Jakinsi, let me see if I can pronounce this correctly. Jakinsi McQuinstry, am I saying that right? That's a tough one for me to say for some reason. He's currently practicing with the Alabama basketball team, so that's obviously looking pretty good there. Silent Chaos mentioning the preferred walk-on wide receiver from Prince Avenue Christian, who's a fun addition to the program. Nature Gator says I should give Zach Albaverdi some credit. Zach's a friend of ours around here. Zach's been on the show many times before. Zach's a good reporter. Jay Shipe says, can't forget about the barber's haircuts at UGA. Yeah, you'd love nothing more than to see Xavier Sorey kind of pull out those clippers and give a little fresh cut to Terrion Arnold. You'd love that. You'd love to be able to there. Dean Butler says, any surprises out there? I shouldn't even know how many players are left to even provide a surprise for you. I'm not really even sure, who's left to even sort of constitute a surprise. I think if Arnold chooses Georgia, I'm like a lot of our audience here and thinking that Bama's the favorite. But if he chooses Georgia, it's not that big of a surprise, right? I mean, we've seen bigger surprises than that. Let's see what else over here on the Facebook side of things. Dana Turk says, what time is Bear Alexander commitment? I've been told it's 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 Central, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on that. So expect that then. Denithian Henderson checking in. Good to see you, sir. Terry Rigdon says, Mullen reminds me of Gomer Pyle. That's pretty funny. Good stuff all the way around. Jamie Kennedy. So Jamie's been a little bit of a name in the news as of late. He says we need a great year this year, and I totally agree with that, Jamie. I think it has been a good start to the year for Georgia. You're not getting everything you want. You don't get the Gilbert. May not get the Arnold here today. You'll wait and see about that. But there's been a lot of other, certainly good things that have happened. Brad Hotnet, very funny, about our buddy William Perry, very funny. Hugh Nash says he's blocking more people. Well, I appreciate that. Richard Sheffield says the basketball team was coached well last night, handled full court pressure well, be patient with Crean. Yeah, Richard, I think you have to be happy with the way that Georgia's played its last couple of games, and you have to really kind of be thinking about, what are they, 4-6 in the SEC now? Couple of winnable games on the horizon after that. Georgia could be, if I'm doing the math in my head correctly, 500 in the league, winning record overall, with a big game against Alabama looming, coming up in just a little bit here. So, there's a chance that, things could fall for Georgia in such a way that there could still be some big games coming with a chance to kind of get back on the bubble. I'm obviously putting carts before horses and being wishful thinking and everything like that. But, I agree with your point that I think Crean is earning some justifiable patience with the way that this team has played as of late. No one's going to deny the South Carolina game was awful, but the way in which Georgia's responded since then has been really remarkable. Really remarkable. A few more comments. Cernard Watson says was hoping to see a surprise Kirby flip. Yeah, we've all been kind of conditioned for that. But my guess is, maybe that's what Barry Alexander's supposed to be. That's not a flip, and it's not even a 2021, but it is a huge name. Of all the guys we've talked about this week, I'm not quite so sure 4 years from now Barry Alexander's not the one you were the most glad to have, and that's not spin. I think that's absolutely real. That you may end up viewing him as the one that you were the most glad kind of landed in the Georgia. Oh, good Lord. That may be the guy that you're the most glad that kind of lands your way. So Alexander may be that one right there that's certainly worth celebrating if it kind of comes the way of UGA later on today. Chad Buchanan says, not very pleased with the mass exodus in the defensive backfield. I know we still have talent, but with no experience or leadership, that talent usually doesn't play to the same level. You're right, certainly about inexperienced talent facing some early growing pains. I think you're probably right about that. I think that's to be expected probably. I don't know what I can criticize though about the mass exodus. You're seeing Tyson Campbell's name, and by the way, all of a sudden now these mock drafts aren't just so and so from draft crazy.com, some website you never heard of. It's the Daniel Jeremiahs and the folks like that who are suggesting that Campbell has a chance to be a first round pick. So you can't fault a guy who leaves to go be a first-round pick. And, for guys like Stokes and others in the, these are 2017 signees. They've been here for a while now, and they're kind of ready to move on. I can't necessarily fault them for that. Maybe you say DJ Daniel should have come back for a year, but Daniel had a really good Senior Bowl, and Daniel, you may remember, was somebody that kind of gotten some love from like Albert Breer and some of those NFL writers even before the season began. So these are guys that are going to have their chance. Certainly, you wish you didn't have this much inexperience in the secondary, but these are guys that are going to have their chance here to go and show something. Joel Moody says he's predicting a big splash from Kirby today. Hugh Nash says, have you heard any specific DBs in the portal or grad transfers we have our eye on? So we're talking about the guy from Oklahoma a moment ago who, may or may not be of interest to Georgia, but will be of interest to some just because he's a former highly rated recruit. We mentioned the other day about, the idea of Elias Ricks from LSU. It seems like that if Ricks were to leave LSU, and it's not even a foregone conclusion that he will, there had just been some chatter that he might. That seems like more of an Ohio State, maybe even USC, potentially, issue there. So far, some of the names that are out there, there's no obvious connection for them to Georgia. It could very well be that the guy that eventually lands at UGA, assuming there is one, is kind of done on a little bit more of a quiet front, maybe. So I would say that right now there's no obvious name that you would connect to Georgia, but there'll be plenty of options. Mike Little says, how's our offensive line going to look this season? I think for me, the big issue there is there someone who emerges at left tackle that makes Georgia feel confident in moving Jamari Salyer to left guard? You want this Georgia offensive line to be at its very best, the best that it can possibly be. Someone playing at a level at the left tackle spot that allows Georgia to move Salyer to where I think is his natural position, the place I think he'll play in the NFL, which is at that guard spot. In addition to that, I would say the other potential variable that could really benefit the Georgia offensive line is if somehow we're looking in a scenario where Cedric Von Prawn emerges as a major contender for playing time at the interior of the offensive line. You get an SVP push for playing time in the interior. You get a big push from someone related to the left tackle spot. All of a sudden, that's the Georgia offensive line at its best. Those are the two spots I would watch. SVP pushing for time, left tackle, someone emerging, and that's how you get your best possible five. Gerald Harmon also expecting to see a surprise from Georgia today, so we'll see how that goes. Dean Butler says there'll probably be a grad transfer that no one is familiar with. Could very well be someone that's not a super famous name. That's certainly a possibility. Jalen Jackson says you can't celebrate getting top recruits, but then complain when we have a mass exodus to the NFL. That's why you recruit. I think that's true, that you want to be, a pipeline to the NFL. And some guys may leave a little sooner than others. And, maybe a program like Alabama, an example of something that's done well is convince guys to stay. I get all of that. Mike D says it's my birthday today, so I need an Arnold commitment for my birthday present. Well, happy birthday to you, and I hope that you get that news. I'm only a few days behind you. My birthday's coming up on February 12th, so we both share February birthdays there. Foster Moss says, what if Arnold is tricking us and going to go to Florida? That would certainly be a mind blower. I'm certainly open to the possibility that some of the chatter about late Georgia momentum, not a trick necessarily, but just an example of trying to hype the eventual decision. And, recruits don't like for there to be a lack of intrigue about their choice when it's made. And Arnold's going to do his on television, so maybe he feels that way even more so. But if there is a swerve here, I don't see it swerving back in the direction of Florida. Florida's seemingly done all it can do to make sure everybody knows they're not involved in this. Green Soldier also asking about the possibility of that transfer portal DB. I am definitely in favor of it, assuming that Georgia's got the roster room, and it seems like they might. I'm definitely in favor of them doing it. It seems like some of the big names that were out there, an eventual possibility, some of that's not quite really coming together. Like, as I mentioned before, Elias Ricks is an example of that. So, some of the names that we assumed as maybe possible candidates here, it looks like the actual person, assuming he does come, maybe someone who's maybe a little less famous than that. Jordan Bowman says, say what you will about Pete Golding, but he did a good job in the national title game in confusing Justin Fields with coverages and pressures. It seems like Golding may be kind of stabilizing himself there a little bit. I mean, at one point, I think a lot of Alabama fans wanted to move Golding out and move Charlie Strong in. I guess Strong is now leaving to go be a staffer for Urban Meyer with Jacksonville, and so it seems like Pete Golding, after being on really pretty shaky ground with Bama fans, would seem to be kind of finding his footing there a bit. I guess that's what a national title will do for you. G. Grace Bama Boy says Arnold could start at UGA and Florida on day one. Y'all need him. We don't. Arnold, I mean, a G. Grace, just a matter of convincing Terrion Arnold of that, I guess. Just a matter of that. Avian Curry also has a February birthday. February 19th, just 2 days after the GOAT, Michael Jordan, who celebrates a birthday on February 17th. I don't know why I know that. Scott Harris says the only advantage of a December signing day is getting those early enrollees for some bowl game practices, and that's true. Georgia's benefited from that before. All right, we are going to get ready to go here today, so we'll be back on video later on this afternoon. We'll cover Terrion Arnold. We'll react to what goes down with Bayer Alexander. It seems like that'll be in the books before we hit video. Just really appreciate you being a part of it all. Big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews, making it all possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews for that. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's one of the reasons why I always feel so confident in recommending everything that goes down with our friends at R.S. Andrews. They just do a good job with that. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta News Now. You can find it at AJC.com. Interesting news from DeKalb County, a record number of homicides, police are saying. You can check out more stories on that. Also, you may have seen on my social media feed the other day, very sad situation in the Athens area involving a young boy who lost a lot of family members in a house fire, and a scary situation, and a lot of folks in that community kind of rallying to his support. Anthony Ant-Man Edwards is the latest to get involved on that. Very good story in the AJC about that. And how about some restaurant takeout options for Super Bowl Sunday coming up? Really good story on that at AJC.com as well. Atlanta News Now, you can find it online at AJC.com. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll see you back here tomorrow, 10 a.m. A lot more recap of National Signing Day on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll look forward to seeing you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.